Imagine a place where you could be locked up for being too pretty, or for being poor, or for having a child without a husband. This isn't a dystopian novel. It's a chapter of Irish history that was hidden in plain sight for over a century. Today, we're talking about the Magdalene laundries, a story of confinement, silence, and the incredible courage of those who survived. What if I told you that from the end of the 18th century until in Ireland there were institutions where women were imprisoned without ever having committed a crime? These weren't prisons in the legal sense. They were called Magdalene laundries, or Magdalene asylums, and they were run by Catholic religious orders. On the surface, they were presented as charitable homes, places of refuge for fallen women. But the reality inside their walls was a world away from charity. For thousands of women and girls, these laundries became their prison, their workplace, and for some, their final resting place. The first one opened its doors in Dublin in 1765, and over the next 2 centuries, they spread across the country, operating as a dark secret that everyone seemed to know about, but no one dared to question. So, who were these women? These so-called fallen souls? You might be picturing criminals or women who had done something terribly wrong, but the truth is far more unsettling. The reasons a woman could be sent to a Magdalene laundry were heartbreakingly arbitrary. Many were simply orphans, transferred from other state-run institutions once they reached adolescence. Others were single mothers, ostracized by a society that placed immense shame on out-of-wedlock births. Their babies were often taken from them and sent for adoption, a wound that would never heal. Then there were the girls deemed inconvenient by their own families. Perhaps they were rebellious, too outspoken, or had been victims of sexual assault themselves. Their trauma twisted into a mark of shame against them. Some were even sent there just for being considered too beautiful, a perceived temptation in a deeply conservative and patriarchal society. They had broken no laws. They were never charged with a crime, never stood before a judge, and never received a sentence. The door of the laundry simply closed behind them, and for many, it would never open again. Their families, the local priests, even the police, could all be complicit in their confinement. Once inside, a woman's identity was systematically stripped away. The first thing to go was her name. She was given a new one, a saint's name, or sometimes just a number. This was the first step in erasing who she was, severing her connection to her past life, her family, and her sense of self. Her personal belongings were taken, her hair was often cut short, and she was forced to wear a drab, uniform-like dress. The silence was absolute. Speaking without permission was forbidden. Friendships were discouraged, seen as a potential source of rebellion. The days were structured around prayer and, most of all, grueling, unpaid labor. They were called Magdalene laundries for a reason. These institutions ran large-scale commercial laundries, washing sheets and uniforms for businesses, hospitals, the army, and even government departments. The women worked from morning until night, in harsh conditions with industrial machinery, their hands raw from the hot water and harsh chemicals. They received no wages for their labor. Their work was framed as a form of penance, a way to wash away their supposed sins. But, in reality, it was a system of slave labor that generated significant income for the religious orders running the laundries. Can you imagine the psychological torment, locked away from the world, with no idea if or when you would ever be released? There was no release date. Sentences were indefinite. A woman's stay could last for a few months, a few years, or her entire life. She was completely cut off from the outside world. Letters were censored or never delivered. Family visits were rare and heavily supervised, if they were allowed at all. The women lived in constant fear and uncertainty, not knowing if anyone on the outside even remembered they existed. Some tried to escape, but the high walls and locked doors made it nearly impossible. If they were caught, the punishments were severe, designed to crush any remaining glimmer of hope. Many women spent decades trapped within these walls, growing old in a state of perpetual penance for a crime they never committed. They watched other women die from illness, exhaustion, or simply from a broken heart, their deaths as unrecorded as their lives. For decades, the system operated with impunity, but in 1993, a shocking discovery began to unravel the carefully constructed wall of silence. A religious order in Dublin sold a piece of land that had been part of their convent and laundry. When developers began to work on the site, They unearthed a mass grave containing the bodies of 155 women. Most were in unmarked graves. Death certificates had been falsified, or were missing altogether. It was a stark, physical manifestation of how these women had been erased, not just in life, but in death. The discovery ignited a public outcry. The last Magdalene laundry finally closed its doors 3 years later, in 1996. Think about that. This system was still in operation within the lifetimes of many people watching this video today. As the laundries closed and the stories began to leak out, a horrifying picture of systemic abuse emerged. The Irish state, which had used the laundries as a convenient dumping ground for problematic women, and had even been a customer of their services, initially denied any responsibility. For years, official reports downplayed the scale of the abuse and the state's complicity. But the state and the church could not keep the truth buried forever. The real turning point came from the survivors themselves. Women who had spent years, even decades, imprisoned in the laundries began to find their voices. Groups like Justice for Magdalenes were formed, and these courageous women started to share their stories publicly. They spoke of the endless work, the hunger, the cold, the constant humiliation, and the profound psychological trauma. Their powerful testimonies could no longer be ignored. They campaigned relentlessly for an official apology and for recognition of the suffering they had endured. Finally, in 2013, the Irish Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, issued a formal state apology to the survivors of the Magdalene laundries. It was a landmark moment, an admission of the state's role in a system of profound human rights abuse. It's now recognized as one of the largest institutional abuse scandals of the 20th century, a stain on the nation's history. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire Magdalene laundries saga is that it wasn't a secret. It happened in plain sight. These laundries were imposing buildings in the middle of towns and cities. People saw the vans coming and going, delivering and collecting laundry. People knew that women went in and often never came out. Society, the state, and the church created a perfect storm of social control, where religious authority went unquestioned and women's lives were deemed disposable. It was a collective failure of an entire society that chose to look away. The story of the Magdalene laundries is a powerful and painful reminder of how easily human rights can be violated when a society allows it, and the immense courage it takes for survivors to reclaim their stories and demand justice. Their fight ensures that these women will not be forgotten. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to learn about this important and difficult part of history. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into stories that deserve to be told. See you next time.